so creatively inspiring. Radio Richard Niles. Zoo, 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 zoo.
Hi, I'm Richard Niles, taking you on another mystical musical journey inside the minds and the manuscripts of the Arrangers. And tonight, I feel compelled by an inner glow to tell you, I see the light. Actually, it's the light music we're going to hear from a very heavy cat, the man generally regarded as the greatest living composer and arranger of light music, Robert Farnon.
Bob is in a place where there aren't too many other people. I'm putting him into the Ellington class. So as I say, that it's not a very crowded room.
All the most famous ones and all the biggest ones, for instance, Don Costa, Marion Evans, their mentor, their main man is Robert Farnon.
I've never heard anyone say anything ill of him. And the prettiness you hear in his music is not just his music, but it's the way he looks at things.
I think anyone that admires or loves great music has to love Bob Farnon. Certainly I know all of the arrangers and writers all look at him as the alpha omega of creative writing.
He's a very compassionate man, very gentle man. He's sensitive, he's perceptive, emotional, very intelligent. I would call him the reason behind my most inspired moments.
Say what you mean, guys. Praise indeed from Henry Mancini, Tony Bennett, Nelson Riddle, Oscar Peterson, and Quincy Jones. It's not surprising then that Canadian-born Robert Farnon has enjoyed a long and successful career in the music industry, where many an arranger, including your own Uncle Richard, can often find frustration and obscurity. But, still in his teens, Bob Farnon became a household name on Canadian radio, and then took over as leader of the Percy Faith Orchestra. There, he came to the attention of self-styled king of jazz, Paul Whiteman, and Andrei Kostelanetz. Nice guys for an arranger to be hanging out with.
I learned an awful lot about orchestration simply by playing in an orchestra, because I played not only for Percy, but before that with the CBC Concert Orchestra, and I used to play in theatre, and I listened, and I learned, the capabilities of every instrument. If I didn't know any question, I would ask if I didn't understand anything. And I think that's the way I learned orchestration, not by teaching. I did study a counterpoint with matter of fact, was Percy Faith's teacher. He was the librarian of the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. And he saw how we both needed a little help. But that's as far as I got, this counterpoint, and from then on I just played it by ear. I was forever listening to inner parts in the orchestra. And I found a good inner part to either play or listen to was quite as interesting as playing the lead. That's how I think I learned an awful lot about it, just by listening to what the inner lines in the orchestra were playing.
It's all very well listening to what other people did, but what Robert Farnon was able to do was to take these sounds and make them his own. So what about the Farnon sound? Is it definable? I asked writer and arranger Roger Kellaway, and first, author of Arranging the Score, Gene Lees.
I came across a Western recently, a movie, and another very good one called Shalako with Sean Connery. And I came in the middle of it on television, and I hadn't heard 4 bars of music, and I said, that's Bob. And his brother, who's also a musician, Brian, was driving from Las Vegas, And he flipped on a car radio and said, "That's my brother."
It's a sound that when I hear it, I say, yeah, that's Bob Farnon. We call him the governor. That's our tribute to him because he's the chief as far as we're concerned. One of the things that's so amazing about Bob is that whatever instrument he chooses to portray the melody always seems to be the correct one in whatever the given circumstances are, and the way he accompanies that instrument is always perfect. The orchestration is just amazing. Very even, up and down, the whole sound spectrum. It's just really glorious. The sense of craft is wonderful. His sense of heart is wonderful.
It's composed of a number of elements, the style of it. You'll hear elements of Delius. You'll hear certainly elements of Ravel, Debussy. I once asked Bob, "Are you a big admirer of Sibelius?" He said, "Yes, because I can hear woodwind things he does that remind me of Sibelius." So there's this tremendous knowledge behind it of all the literature of the musical world.
The sound spectrum is made up of unlimited combinations of colors. Once you've heard a particular arranger or composer's way of putting those colors together enough times, you're able to identify generally who that person is. So that's about as close as I can get to describing Bob's sound. You know, some of us have listened to him long enough to know how he puts some of his colors together. In fact, I heard Johnny Mandel was saying, I think a couple of years ago, that Bob was threatening to change his sound completely because everybody else is stealing his sound.
Andre Previn called him the world's greatest string writer. He does things with woodwinds that are very distinctive. I don't know anybody else who does quite like that. There's a phenomenon in writing called what in England they call part writing, in which we call it voice leading in America. It's the movement of the chords. It's the movement of the lines inside the chord from one to the next. And in really good writing, they make melodies of their own inside, not just the top melody. And Bob's voice leading, or part writing, Bob's voice leading is exquisite and very much admired by other musicians.
20-30 hours, Monday night, time for one of your three main AEF orchestras.
The Canadian band of the AEF presents the Canada Show.
Yes, it's music for Canadians, for the men and women of Canada serving overseas and for the Allied forces everywhere. Music of distinction styled by the Canadian band of the AEF under the direction of Captain Bob Farnon. Songs of the day by Privates Joan Dallas and Paul Carpenter. And the Canada Show chorus with Private Jerry Travers. In the guest spotlight, Vincent Tilsley's Master Singers. Streamlined entertainment for frontline listening, so take 30 and take it easy, will you? And that, in the words of the opening number, is an order from the Army.
During the war, Farnon led the Canadian band of the Allied Expeditionary Forces, working alongside Glenn Miller, who led the U.S. band, and British leader George Melancrino. These were formative years for the young Robert Farnon. Musicians conscripted into the forces could forget commercial considerations and focus more on the creative side. Farnon had a ball with this artistic freedom, and he immersed himself in both the American and British traditions he was being exposed to. Oddly enough, it was the British scene that intrigued Farnon the most, and music lovers on these cold grey islands are grateful that when given his discharge, Farnon chose to settle not in his native Toronto, but in London. Farnon's first British gig was with the Giraldo organization, but his real break came when he was signed to Decca as their in-house conductor and arranger. It was there he worked with artists like Vera Lynn, Paul Carpenter, Anne Shelton, Norman Wisdom, and Gracie Fields.
You will find perfect peace of mind when you find the bluebird of happiness to
I certainly learned a lot about singers and how different each one is. I was taught a lot by someone like Gracie Fields, for instance. Simplicity, the importance of simplicity, I learned that through her. The less the better, and she taught me that.
When you find the bluebird of
Although Farnon got to work with some great singers, he really wanted to focus on his own instrumental music. Towards the end of 1948, Decca gave him the breathing space to release the classic '78 Jumping Bean. With this amusing little hit, Farnon gave light music a new long lease of life with interest.
We have this penchant for putting things into categories. Is it because it isn't so serious in the way he puts it together that we have to call it light music, or I don't know.
Well, now, a lot of those tunes came from the war years when I was writing for the Canadian Army Orchestra. I used to be able to experiment with them till the cows came home because they were all under my command.
Uh-huh.
I used to write a lot of little pieces, humorous pieces, for the Army Orchestra. And out of that lot came some of the themes which I used later and developed into full-length light music compositions.
The Symphonettes established Farnon as a big name on the British scene, and from the late 1940s onwards, his career was grooving most bodaciously. Apart from his obvious creative talent, I asked Joseph Lanza, author of Elevator Music, if there was maybe another element to his success.
He was among the few of the major names in mood music that contributed a significant amount of tunes to production music libraries. He had done an enormous amount of work for the Chapel Library, and he was noted for just being able to evoke a romantic association with the great outdoors, or maybe some kind of a lush setting in a penthouse, and he could convey plots, characters, feelings, situations with just a few musical phrases and often very pithy titles. Like he would have one called A Portrait of a Flirt. And when you hear it, at least when I hear it, I have a cinematic association with some pretty woman driving in a sports car with the wind blowing in her hair, and as she's passing by, she's just winking to anybody who catches her eye. That's the perfect song that you would get for a very wistful drama, a woman's picture with this emotional deluge, and slides into this lighter mode with the violins and the soft horns and the woodwinds. He could give you these very sweet, undisturbing melodies with effervescent strings. He, like many of the mood music people, were able to whip air into the music, and I think that's what gives it its appeal.
As well as his countless television credits, Farnon realized his dreams by getting into movies, and he didn't have to sleep with anyone apart from his own wife.
Just shortly at the end of the war, one of the first things that I wanted to do was write for films, because in Canada, as you may know, there was no film industry there to speak of. But when I got to England, I wanted to get into films as badly as anything, and I met this lovely woman who was the casting director and she was a manager of the film company called Herbert Wilcox and Anna Neagle, who produced a lot of big films. And she eventually got me in to do their first musical after the war. And from then on, it just snowballed, and I did several pictures with that company and then moved on to Warner Brothers and other companies. And I was with films for about 25, 30 years, I think. Well, I think the most enjoyable film to work on was a sea swashbuckler called Captain Horatio Hornblower. That was the most delightful one to do. There was about 2.5 hours of music in it, so there was plenty of ammunition there.
There's a suite derived from it that is one of the most magnificent things I've heard. He's remarkably skillful at capturing moods. There's a section in there called The Wind, and it's when the ships have been becalmed and a wind stirs, and the way he captured that feeling is just astounding.
As an arranger myself, I get tired just thinking about the sheer volume of work that Farnon has produced. And we arrangers rarely get a chance to talk to others in our profession, so I asked Bob about his routine. Does he start at the piano?
No, I don't write at the piano. I find it wastes too much time. I work at a desk, and I use the piano occasionally for reference, as I think most writers do. But I prefer to write at a desk, and I prefer to write in the morning, starting fairly early in the morning, and then up until about lunchtime, and then that's it, and the rest of the afternoon do something else. Walk the dog or practice the trumpet or something. I would use a sketch if I was doing an orchestral work, of course, but not for vocal accompaniments or things of that kind. Usually just go on, and if I'd start an arrangement, and if the first thought wasn't coming off, then I'd get up and go out and have a rest. I wouldn't labor at it until I got what I wanted. I'd just get away from it for a while, come back and feel refreshed, and then what I wanted would happen almost immediately then.
There's a piece he told me he wrote it after the horror of the war. A French-Canadian folk song, À la Clairefontaine. It's actually French, I think, originally, À la Clairefontaine. And it's the sweetest, gentlest piece of music. And there's a French-Canadian composer of mine said he took, I forget how many bars, 16 bars or whatever the thing is in length. And he said he turned it into a little symphony. It's gorgeous. I was with a bunch of French-Canadian guys, all musicians, at a French-Canadian music camp one summer. And that À la Clairefontaine is terribly well known in Canada. And one of the guys, a composer, put the CD on. And there must have been about 10 guys at that table. And tears were streaming down their faces.
That shows you what a phenomenally talented guy like Robert Farnon can do with a simple tune. I had to ask Bob what it was like working with the incredible vocal group Singers Unlimited, a dream gig for any arranger.
You must remember this, a kiss is still a kiss, a sigh is just a sigh. The fundamental things apply as time goes by.
It was unbelievable, really, and what happened was Gene Perling of the Highlows, we firstly did an album with Singers Unlimited called Sentimental Journey, and he sent me the routines of each song. Then I recorded the accompaniments. Then they went off to the studio in Germany and recorded the vocals. We didn't work together, we worked separately, sometimes a month or 2 months apart. But that was just working with them. We did one live one together, in that we were in Germany in the same studio that they used. Although they didn't record the vocals because it was multi-track recording. You know, he had as many as 16 to 20 different voices. So he had to do that separately and not with the orchestra. It was something unique at the time. It was the first time it ever happened, you know, to hear 4 voices sounding like the Vienna Boys Choir.
It's still the same old story, a fight for love and glory, a case of do or die. The
The next time you hear someone praise one of the current so-called vocal groups, ask them if they've heard Singers Unlimited. Over the last quarter century, Farnon has not only remained at the forefront of the British light music scene, but continued working with singers like Tony Bennett and Lena Horne, and jazz musicians like George Shearing, Oscar Peterson, and his great buddy Dizzy Gillespie. Always recognized by his peers, he's won numerous Ivor Novello Awards, including Outstanding Services to British Music. And he's been granted the Order of Canada. I guess that means free maple syrup for life. But the real sweet part came in 1995 when he was awarded a Grammy for his arrangement of this tune, Lament, one of the tracks on jazz trombonist J.J. Johnson's album Tangents.
It was a great surprise, and honestly, it was so unexpected. I thought, if anything, he would get the Grammy for the album itself. But it was he who called me up and said, "You know what's happened?" And it made my day, my week, my month when he told me that this one arrangement had done the trick. It just happened to be one of the tunes on the album, and it seemed to appeal to the judges. They liked it and selected. Although, just between you and me, I think an old friend of mine, Quincy Jones, had something to do with it. He said, well, now, Farnon, now he's nearly 100. It's about time that we gave him a Grammy. I think it might have happened that way. He just sent me the tunes along with some others that he wanted me to do, and some that I already knew, like Malaguena. But that was a new tune to me, and I just sat down. He said, go ahead and do what you feel like. He said, don't write too much trombone, and he said, write it for the orchestra. So I did, and it turned out more an orchestral arrangement than an arrangement for solo instrument and orchestra.
Ah, a Grammy Award. Now, if you've been listening to these shows and hearing all the brilliant work people like Robert Farnon do, don't you think it's rather a shame that there's no British award given to arrangers? Farnon's career has been long and varied, and I asked him if it might be possible to pick out a highlight. Bob didn't have to think too long. The year was 1962, and the name was Frank Sinatra.
We'll gather lilacs in the spring again and walk together down an English lane until our hearts have learned to sing again. When you come home once more,
it was a recording studio, of course, and that's his favorite method of working. But the studio was full of his fans. They were sitting everywhere. They were sitting all around my podium, under the piano, on the piano. And he just loved to have that crowd in there with him. That crowd to him was his audience. Yeah, I'd never experienced this before, working with an artist who had, a fan club in the studio, but they were more than fans. They were very famous people who came, and some of them were fighting at the door to get in. And it was an absolutely wonderful experience, but the greatest experience of all was working with that master of song. He was just something else.
and in the evening by the firelight's glow.
At 83 years old, Robert Farnon and his music has touched a lot of hearts and uplifted a lot of souls. Of course, there's still plenty of composing left in our Bob, who simply can't imagine life without music.
I do know what it's like if I'm not working. I'm completely miserable. I hardly talk with the dog, let alone my wife. Even in my dreams, when I've dreamed, they always concern music, nothing else. Not even a beautiful blonde. It's always music.
The last time I looked, I was Richard Niles. I hope your dreams tonight will be filled with the romantic music of Robert Farnon. And next week, we'll be hearing about the life of a man whose dreams are about as romantic as a hot tamale, the California trumpet player who made Tijuana famous for more than just the indigestion, the lonely bull himself, Herb Alpert. My own romantic thanks this week to that all-round nice guy, the amorous Robert Farnon, to ardent writers Gene Lees and Joseph Lanza, and to that passionate musician Roger Kellaway. And special chocolate-covered thanks to my devoted producer Elizabeth Clark.
Your eyes will tell me all I want to know when you come